Thanos snapped and they all disappeared. But in Avengers Endgame, the tables were turned and our heroes won the day, at a great cost. We loved the movie, and while it was the definitive ending for the past 11 years of Marvel movies, we still have some unanswered questions. Join ScreenRant as we address the questions still lingering after Avengers Endgame. First things first, let's go to the end. Sure, we wanted an end credits scene or even a mid-credits scene, but there was no scene featuring any characters from the movie. No teaser for Spider-Man Far From Home, and definitely no sequence linking this film to any forthcoming Fantastic Four or X-Men MCU tale. There was, however, that mysterious noise. But what exactly was that noise after the end credits, and why was it placed there? Some have suggested that this is in fact sound taken from the original 2008 Iron Man movie when Tony Stark first built his armor. If this is the case, it's a heartfelt look backward before the MCU jumps into the future with the next batch of films. Where did Gamora go off to? Most of us knew that Infinity War wouldn't be the last we'd see of Gamora. She'd grown so much as a character over the past two Guardians movies, and while her passing was an essential twist in Infinity War, her return thanks to the time travel element will definitely bring her back for Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. While she is definitely a different Gamora, lacking the shared history her other self shared with the Guardians over the past several years, perhaps the consciousness of her old self could be restored to the new Gamora if the Guardians get a hold of the Soul Stone. How does everyone adjust to the 5-year age gap that now exists between half the population? 5 years is a long time, in Earth years at least, and while the survivors may have had a hard time adjusting to life without half the people on the planet, we have to imagine that it's almost equally different for the people who were just brought back to life in Endgame. Hopefully there will be more support groups for these newly returned souls looking to adjust to a world that was trying for several years to move on without them. We have to assume there's going to be some hiccups as the world's governments try to take care of all these people who for 5 years didn't exist. Where, oh where, did Loki take the Tesseract? Look, Loki is a fan favorite. The God of Mischief is good for a laugh and a great antagonist for the Avengers to face. So while we're super happy he's back, we have to wonder what this Loki will do with the Tesseract in hand. We have to assume he'll come back to haunt Thor at some point in the movies, but this was also likely a ploy to bring Loki back for his upcoming Disney Plus show. While not much is known about Loki's series, which will launch on Disney's streaming service, we do know that it will likely feature the Asgardian trickster as he impacts and tampers with humans throughout history. Sounds pretty fun. Now, if only we knew of his first stop. So when exactly does Spider-Man Far From Home take place? We've been told it takes place right after Infinity War, and Kevin Feige has even said that he considers Far From Home to be the final Marvel film in Phase 3 rather than Endgame. While this may be some ploy to keep people interested following the earth-shattering timeline-altering events of Endgame, let's take Feige at his word. The one thing we don't know for sure though is how exactly are all the characters in Spider-Man's circle somehow seemingly uninfluenced by the 5-year time jump of Endgame. Oddly enough, it seems that by the end of Endgame, Spider-Man's friends were all the same age, unaffected by the 5-year time difference. Where will the new title of Captain America take Sam Wilson? And how will Bucky fit into his story? While some fans have hoped Bucky would get the title, it seems like both Steve and Bucky think Sam Wilson is truly worthy to be the next Captain America. And based on some recent statements by the Russo brothers, the old man version of Captain America had informed Bucky of his intentions to bestow the honor on Sam sometime shortly before they find him on the bench after Tony Stark's funeral. That's why Bucky had such a knowing glance leading up to this moment. Whether you were Team Sam or Team Bucky, you'll get the chance to see both characters team up long-term in the forthcoming Disney Plus series, Falcon and the Winter Soldier.
You couldn't have done that earlier?
I hate you.
What's happening with the Hulk? Will he join Thor and the Guardians of the Galaxy? We certainly hope so. After Thor Ragnarok, Thor and Bruce Banner are a match made in space heaven, and the MCU finally figured out how to make the most of Mark Ruffalo and Chris Hemsworth's comedic talents, charisma, and chemistry, under the watchful eye of director Taika Waititi. But to improve upon the situations of that previous movie, we've got to assume that Bruce will generally be able to control his professorial persona while in his big green form. Thankfully, the Russos didn't undo any of their major developments from the end of Endgame. Now, let's just hope the MCU figures out the perfect combination of new characters in the post-Endgame era. When Steve Rogers went back in time, did he avoid taking up the Captain America mantle that whole time? We've gotta hope that there are some extra Steve Rogers Captain America stories up Marvel's sleeve, especially if some of the Phase 4 storylines start falling short. It'd be a lot of fun to see Steve Rogers' adventures in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, perhaps even as shorts before the main theatrical releases. Even though Endgame's version of time travel involved the creation of alternate timelines, we'd like to think that no matter what adventures might come Steve Rogers' way in this alternate history, that he has a happy ending. Is Vision gone forever? Remember, he didn't disappear in Thanos' snap at the end of Infinity War. Rather, he was destroyed by Thanos. While the surviving Avengers may have picked up his body and taken him back to headquarters, they weren't able to revive him during the 5 years that passed between films. That said, he's expected to come back for the Disney Plus spin-off series with Paul Bettany and Elizabeth Olsen called WandaVision. Olsen has stated that the 6-hour-long miniseries will have a 50s aesthetic which will fit the show's theme. Is she talking about the look of the show, or might time travel bring Vision back? Is an A-Force movie on the way? Look, we don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but Marvel Studios is full of surprises. While we have a general idea of certain movies that are in the pipeline, Black Widow, Black Panther 2, Doctor Strange 2 to name a few, there's a lot that we don't know about the next movies due out in the franchise. And hey, an A-Force movie wouldn't be half bad. The A-Force is the first all-female lineup of the Avengers and first showed up in the comics in 2015. In Endgame, when the superwomen took the battlefield, including Captain Marvel, Valkyrie, Rescue, Nebula, and Gamora, we got excited. In Phase 4 and beyond, anything is possible. So why not make this happen, Marvel? Even though we love Steve Rogers' happy ending, doesn't this prove that the Avengers' time-traveling excursion does have an impact on their own timeline? Unless Steve Rogers created a separate timeline when he went back to marry Peggy and just happened to return to the Endgame timeline to give his shield away. But that seems to further convolute an already very convoluted storyline. We'd like to think that Steve, in remaining in the Endgame timeline while also marrying Peggy in the past, changed some things. Like maybe not getting with Sharon Carter. Although getting into the details on what Cap was doing then would likely create a problem in the time-space continuum and cause all our brains to explode. How did Captain Marvel find Tony Stark adrift at the start of the film? As we all remember from the end of Infinity War, Tony and Nebula were the only survivors on Titan. They took the Guardian ship and were adrift in space for quite some time before running out of resources. Luckily, Carol Danvers happened upon the ship before Tony totally kicked the bucket. While we're given no inkling as to why Danvers was able to locate them, let's consider the fact that the fight with Thanos was on such an epic scale and that his use of the gauntlet triggered an energy blast that compelled Captain Marvel to investigate. She found the planet empty but was able to locate the nearest ship and voila, she finds Tony and Nebula. Why was Hawkeye allowed to obtain the Soul Stone even though he didn't literally sacrifice Black Widow? The rules on Vormir seem pretty strict, with Red Skull reiterating that the Soul Stone could only be obtained by someone if they sacrificed what they loved most. We see this enacted when Thanos throws Gamora off the cliff in Infinity War. However, when Hawkeye and Black Widow reach Vormir, they're both fighting each other to see who will go over the cliff. If one is not sacrificing the other, and if Black Widow and Hawkeye don't love each other most in the world, and we're not led to believe they have some kind of secret romantic love for one another, then doesn't the Soul Stone seem to give itself to Hawkeye pretty easily following Black Widow's death? What is happening with the Black Widow movie now that she's gone? So Marvel got us all excited by finally announcing that a Black Widow movie will get a prime spot in their Phase 4 lineup. The only problem is, and it's a big one, Black Widow fell off of a cliff in the last movie. So we've got to assume that unless some crazy time travel occurs, the movie will serve as a flashback set in a previous era, similar to the Captain Marvel standalone feature. While we'll likely learn a lot about Black Widow's past as a super spy, one thing's for sure, we better learn what the heck happened in Budapest. With director Kate Shortland reportedly chosen by Scarlett Johansson and a crack team at the helm, this movie will kick butt when it comes out, hopefully in 2020. Why does Thanos seem nearly invincible without the stones at his disposal? Okay, this one is less noticeable on first viewing, but gets more glaring the more you think about it. In Infinity War, Thanos takes quite a beating, whether it's by Hulk or Thor or even a slight cut brought on by Tony Stark. The guy isn't fully invincible until he has all the stones on his gauntlet. Even when he has a few of the Infinity Stones collected, he still takes several hits from the good guys. However, when the past version of Thanos shows up, he seems stronger and more powerful, even holding his own against Captain Marvel, all while having no stones in his possession. How did the Soul Stone get returned to Vormir after the Avengers were done with it? This one seems particularly tricky because its resting place on Vormir is eerie, mystical, and guarded by a super creepy Red Skull cosplaying as Lord Voldemort. Still, Captain America had to return it like he promised to return the other Infinity Stones, and by the end of the movie, we're led to believe he accomplished this task. Yet, did he have to make any weird pacts to put it back on Vormir? Maybe if he brought the stone back to Vormir, he'd be able to get a sacrificed life back. Could this bring Black Widow back from beyond the grave? Here's to hoping. On another seemingly awkward note, did Captain America have to give the Aether back to Jane Foster? He said he would return the Aether to its original timeline once they were done using it. And if so, he'd need to inflict it back upon Jane Foster back during the events of Thor: The Dark World. Look, the stones are not cut and dry, easy materials to deal with, and getting into contact with one does not bode well for the fates of you or your friends. So if Jane didn't want to be involved in this whole dark magic infestation, she probably should have stayed away from Thor in the first place. Was this seriously the only way to defeat Thanos that Doctor Strange was talking about? Okay, so we all remember how Doctor Strange had confirmed that during all of his timeline explorations in Infinity War, the outcome of Avengers Endgame was the only solution out of over 14 million possibilities. Still, there's a lot of conveniences and coincidences in order for this version of the events to occur. And if Doctor Strange truly foresaw Tony's time-traveling invention and all the Back to the Future 2 style hijinks through MCU moments past, then the Doctor truly is the Sorcerer Supreme. Otherwise, maybe there were a couple of easier options that Doctor Strange may have missed. Whatever happened to Peggy Carter's husband from the original timeline? Here's one we touched on a bit before. If Captain America went back in time and married his sweetheart Peggy Carter, he changed a few things. Most of all, he robbed Peggy Carter's original husband of the chance to marry her. That said, a documentary from Captain America: The Winter Soldier told us that Peggy Carter eventually moved on, marrying a guy that was previously rescued from Hydra's clutches by Captain America. Beyond that, we were never given an identity to the man. So perhaps it was always Steve Rogers, and Peggy just hid that info from the public. That would tie things up nicely for the Rogers-Carter storyline. How does Captain Marvel fit into the next phase of films? Also, where was she for most of this movie? We understand that the Russo brothers wanted to keep this movie focused on the legacy characters who have served as the leads in previous MCU phases. But where will Captain Marvel take the future entries in this saga? We know she's one of the most powerful beings in the universe. Kevin Feige said as much before her standalone film came out. But in order to keep things interesting, the MCU creative team will need to keep finding weaknesses for Captain Marvel to overcome. And the best weaknesses for most invulnerable superheroes come in the form of the people and places they need to protect. Is Katherine Langford in the movie? Sure, this question may seem to come out of nowhere, but it's based around the fact that early Endgame rumors swirled around a mysterious cameo played by Langford. Maybe she was set to play a female Hawkeye if, say, an earlier draft of the movie had the Archer bited at Vormir, sparing Black Widow's life. But we may never know for sure until later in Phase 4. How did Pepper become a professional warrior in her rescue armor? Look, we all saw Pepper get some combat time in Iron Man 3, but since then she's been mostly relegated to cameos. While we have no idea about what type of training she's undergone off-screen, most of our attention has been devoted to her famous spouse. It was nice to see Gwyneth Paltrow get some action in the rescue armor, and maybe this means we'll see more of Pepper Potts in the future of the MCU. While we didn't get to see her train, she did have a whole 5 years to improve her fighting skills during Endgame's time jump, so who really knows? How did Steve age? Sure, he was finally able to live as full of a normal life as possible thanks to time travel. But if he could withstand all those hits from Thanos, his superpowered blood, under the influence of the serum coursing through his veins, should have kept him from aging like a normal human. Speaking of aging, how did the quantum realm keep Scott Lang from aging if Michelle Pfeiffer's Janet Van Dyne aged as normal during her decades-long stay inside? Marvel's been pretty good about plot holes, considering they jumped to more timelines than a murderous robot played by Arnold Schwarzenegger, so we guess we'll have to let some plot holes slide. Was the mouse cameo a reference to Disney? One of the more convenient but humorous moments in the film came from a plot device that freed Scott Lang from his confinement in the quantum realm. At the end of Ant-Man and the Wasp, Scott was trapped in the quantum realm since everyone else who knew of his whereabouts were ashed away by Thanos' Infinity War snap. After 5 years inside the quantum realm, a mouse wandered over the controls in the van and freed Lang from confinement. We'd like to think that the appearance of a mouse is a nod to Mickey and Disney, the parent company that allowed these Marvel movies to be made with their level of quality and execution in the first place. Will the remaining Avengers continue on as the Avengers? We hope so. While we lost Tony Stark and Black Widow and Steve Rogers is likely retired, Thor is still hammering away and Hulk is smashing all the competition. Plus, the new recruits like Spider-Man, Black Panther, Doctor Strange, and Captain Marvel have enough charisma to keep the group appealing. While we'll never forget the first supergroup, the MCU will keep finding ways to evolve and change with the times. And if the audience ever gets bored, well, let's just say comic books have always found a way to bring long-lost characters back for one last go-around. Maybe we haven't seen the last of Tony, Steve, Natasha, or the other oldies just yet. The Avengers assembled, or rather reassembled. And while this film was the swan song of certain cast members, it's just the beginning for newer characters like Spider-Man, Captain Marvel, and Black Panther. But what happens after Endgame? Where does the MCU go from here? Keep watching ScreenRant to find out. Hit subscribe and join our notification squad to stay up to date on the latest and greatest superhero news in the MCU and beyond. See you next time.